Okay, so moving on from what we talked about last week, this week we're going to get a little deeper into threat intelligence and threat hunting. This is a really big area for cybersecurity specialists and analysts. Most of the jobs that you're going to see for first incident response and also specialist and analyst position is going to focus in this area and a little bit more deeper in details in threat hunting. I have a former student who is now working for an IT firm, but he specialized in threat hunting. When he started like you, he was very much in love with the concept of threat hunting, right? It sounds really intriguing. It sounds very interesting every day. Um, and then this is his third year with the company, and he came from Moreno Valley College, right? And so I met with him for lunch not too long ago because I was trying to dig out some internship with the company because they're national. He's currently based in Las Vegas. And some of their contracted clients are the casinos and some of the local organizations over there, and even some East Coast clients. And he told me the least thing that he likes to do now is threat hunting. So, your perspective in the task and things change over time. It's not that he's tired of it. It's just certain things in threat hunting can wear you down sometimes. Like I said, this requires a lot of patience and so you have to go through the process. And what I tell students is sometimes it seems really appealing when you're learning the concept. And then when you start doing it, you can have a better understanding of what you enjoy doing and what you want to flourish in. So once you get that experience, you're going to see more. So in this week, we're going to cover two chapters, chapter 2 and 3. We are going to get into threat intelligence. And last week, we talked a little bit about recon and also gathering passive and active gathering information. So there are 3 levels of threat intelligence. You have the broader information, which is what you start with, of what threats would be and who are the threat actors in the organization. So that's strategic threat intelligence. And then you have the tactical part, which is more technical. So many of us tend to operate in the middle, the second one, because it is more comfortable for us. We are IT by nature, right? So because we're able to control more in what we configure and what kind of information we can obtain. So what you would see is the technical and the behavior of information would then be directly useful for security plans and implementation. And then, but when you're looking at SOC, right, Security Operations Center, they incorporate all of these 3. So the operational, it would then have the detailed information of specific threats, include where it comes from, how it changes over time, what is its potential or behavior, and how to prevent it. So when you're looking at threat intelligence, you're really gathering information in these 3 areas. Okay. And where do we get that from? We're really pulling it, number one, from the industry threat feeds, right? Are we going to be able to get everything that there is in the world in the wild? No, right? You want to be up to date as possible. A lot of the times these feeds are going to give you major information on what's new, what's changing. For example, like exploitation kits, what's available, what kind of vulnerabilities you're facing, what kind of malware is impacting. So the threat feeds, but the areas that we first need to get is really our systems, right? Our system information, host names, IP addresses, domains, servers, URLs, and so on. So let's go through and answer some of these questions. My cursor. So for number 1, you can simply grab what's on the first part of the note, or you can summarize it. The 3 categories of threat intelligence include strategic, threat intelligence, that's broader information of threats and threat actors and the trends. So in analysis, we want to take a look at how that trend would impact the organization, could be negatively or positively, right? A lot of time negatively, and how we respond to it. So what does that mean? Historical data can also give us a better understanding of what's going on, but also data that's impacting other organization or in that's happening in the industry, um, that's going to help us preparing on how we would respond. So that's going to be used to create your security plan, to be able to prepare ourselves for what could be coming, right? So for example, if you're looking at a hospital, right, their preparation is usually, a lot of things amongst those things would be like ransomware. And so with that, they would need to have some kind of information on potential threats or threats that had impacted the company, to be able to build out security plans. Like I said before, the second area is the tactical, and it is the technical and the behavior of information that will be useful for us. So that will be used when we're configuring our systems, okay? We would be using that to be able to configure our firewalls, our intrusion detection systems, our accounts, our access, privileges and permissions, and so on. So when you're doing a lot of the tactical area, it's really, really implementing the procedures, or the practices to be able to increase your defense through the technical configurations and settings. And then operational, as we mentioned, that is more detailed in information on how we should respond to a threat, because we would have a better understanding of what it is, where it comes from, how it changes over time, and the capability and the behavior. So if you're looking at malware in general, right? Polymorphic malware changes could be from action to action in the system. So let's say that your antivirus or security software is doing its job and it's containing a certain type of impact on that malware. But polymorphic malware it's coded to design with conditions. That means that if this happens, it's going to modify its form and look at other ways it would be negatively impacting the system. So that means that it can spread across to a different type of file. So the first impact would be that it isn't executable. It comes in, it might impact a certain system 32 folder, and some files that would cause your driver to fail, right? Your anti-malware would be able to contain that. And then, in that case, the source code would then go to the next condition, it would then change. So that means that it could impact a different file type. It could spread across the network. So that is going to give you the capability and the changes. So that means that if you're able to gather that intelligence, you already have an expectation, a prediction on how that threat is going to move across, right? And then how to be able to prevent it. So I really feel like a strong security plan, a solution would always, right, incorporate the operational, because that's how you're going to be able to make sure that you have a thorough solution. Any questions? Okay. So what we will do is we will go to virusshare.com, right? We want to take a look at some of the malware sample that is being shared to the website. So this website allows the community to be able to submit, right, malicious code that impacted the organization, or they were found somehow through networks or systems. So what you want to do is you want to take a look. So let's go to it. Okay. Now on here, you would see some information regarding, how things are updated on ViruShare. Here you would have the hash type, right? And then some of the file size information, the type. And what you would see, because it is mostly created for PC environment, for Windows environment, you're gonna have dynamic library. Do you guys know what DLL does? CS25, that should. So dynamic library is used for drivers, right? And drivers is a type of software that control what? Your hardware, right? So I won't be able to use my mouse or my keyboard if I don't have the proper USB driver for it. I won't, or even mouse and keyboard driver for it. I won't be able to use my monitor. So depending on the type of dynamic library, so you automatically would see that there is executable and in the Windows environment, that will be exe, right? And in order to execute tasks, it's gonna need to access the dynamic library, and that is being utilized by your operating systems, right? See, Microsoft Windows, that should come up right away. And so what you would see is the extension that it has, which is DLL, so that should jump off right away. And then your TRID, and so what I want to do with this is to get you more comfortable by looking at these things. So sometimes we have to go to these sites to look up information about our threats. Okay. So going back to the assignment, you're going to visit the website. You're going to look at the type of malware sample that is being shared on the web page, right? You're going to select a vulnerability that's related to some form of network appliances or communication. And what you're going to do is you're going to write down some information. So this teaches you to document some information that would be relevant, because what we want is we want to be able to track it. We want to be able to close out the vulnerability in case we're impacted, right? And looking at the level of impact, even if this threat is not hitting you now, it could possibly impact your organization. So we want to be able to write it down. Let me see if you can go to the report. Yeah, so from the previous page, if you go to the report, so what I did was I click this right here, and that's going to take you to the report that will look like this. Okay. And what it does is it also tell you like the size of that and the dynamic library impact. These are some of the analysis that the vendor specific does, like some of your security software company, right? Or even cloud-based company. You notice that it goes undetected for most, right? So even if you have AVG, this type of threat, it will just pass it. Like I mentioned before, your anti-malware is only effective about 60% of the time, right? Because sometimes things goes undetected. And then with Avast, If you're using Avast, that's also undetected. Avira, which I use, no cloud base, like local base, that's also undetected. So even if we're using anti-malware, a lot of times see we don't see our threats coming through. Let me see, they changed this up, so I don't know if you have to log in now. Let's see if we go back, because they changed this now. Yeah, I think they require you to log in now to search and download. So for number 2, if you want, you can create a login, right? What we'll do is we will put down the MD5 hash of what we see there on the home, which is for the dynamic library type. So here, right, you got the MD5 hash, so you can copy that. So every file that you see that's created, as we talked about this before, it has a hash. And what this hash is going to tell us the originality. The file size, if you take a look, this is a pretty decent size. Okay. And then this is the file type right here. Okay. So once we put down number 2, we're going to go to CISA.gov. And then what we can do is we can look at some of the new or recent vulnerabilities, and then you can find a vulnerability of your choice, and we want to write down the information. So let's try that. Okay. You can see even from the right-hand side, right, you would have some news about some vulnerability. Let me see, there's exploited catalog. So they added some known exploited. And then also industry specific area. Yeah, I didn't change this up. So I'm gonna use this one. Let me see if I can get the information that I need. Okay, so let's walk back. So what I did was I selected one of the links over here. So I'm gonna choose the industrial control system, but you're welcome to read the other articles like this one. So I'll go through this one first, and then we'll take a look at the other ones. So this one is pretty recent, right? Look at the date. And then what you see is it's going to show you the model and the type. So let's say you work for the organization and this is one of the system that you work with. You have to be able to track and see if there's vulnerability with it. So let's say we go to the Rockwell Automation PowerFlex. So the attention, so your CVSS, this is the vulnerability tracking number right here. your exploitable, it's exploitable remotely. That means that someone can control that remotely. And then it gives you some detailed information, right? Like the type of system it is, and then how it's affected. And so it's impacting infrastructure sectors. So we know that this is for automation and industrial automation. Let me see if I can find a better one to help you answer that one. Oracle Agile product. That's a software. Also another software. So we can go to view all advisory and you can choose, right? So what I click here is this blue button. That's going to take you to all advisory. So this is a really good resource for you to go through and dig out some information. Let's find something that's network related. Rapid response. Industrial control, we looked at that one. Let's go to page 2. So you would see that there's a lot of like industrial controllers and software related type. There's ghost ransomware. So sometimes you don't have as much like network related appliance issues. Customer SIM. A lot of Siemens, huh? Buffer overflow. Composer. All right, so we'll choose this one. Closest one is our communications equipment. Okay. So what you can do is you can document the information that's given there. Who's your vendor? So let's go through and answer that. Oops. So you can put down your CVSS number instead of the CVU. And then the general information, we want to put down the type of things that would be advisory for. And so sometimes they would tell you there is a related vulnerability. That means that there are flaws in other areas or other software and hardware that would be related to it, right? So you need to document that. So it tells us here that there's authentication bypass using alternative path or channel hidden functionality. That's for the equipment. These are your affected products right here. So you can put that under the impact. So if we have any of this equipment, we have to be able to look at their vulnerabilities, right? Their impact. And then your related CVE, this is the number. Okay. So CVE 2025-0674 was assigned to this vulnerability. And it gives you the vector string. So every vulnerability is calculated, and I'll show you how the points are derived. And so the base score here, it tells you it's 9.3. So everything we quantify, we calculate the CVSS. So that's going to tell us like how severe that is. So the related CVE for this one. So you have to kind of read into the article, and it's going to document the related CVEs. That's for the authentication bypass. And then you might have the same or a different one, right? So there's a second area. This is for the hidden functionality. And the score is a little bit lower, 7.5 instead of 9.5. So the higher here for the 9.3, that shows that this vulnerability is ranking higher than this area, but these two is what impacting that device for that vendor, right? And what uses that? All of these equipment right here. Okay. So when you're looking at IoT devices, you're going to see a lot of this. So this is a way to show you how you can research this information or gather the intelligence. Any question? Yeah. I'm sorry? Yeah, there's one, is this one? This is the BitLocker one. Can you look to see what number this is? Somebody? Oh, the monitor is coming. Yeah, it's not VP. Okay, so no questions on the third question of our assignment? Okay, so next we're gonna take a look at Mandiant, right? And Mandiant is gonna give you the open IOC, and you're gonna look at the use case. And Open IOC platform is a really good way for you to gather some information. So before we write down all the answers, right, you can go here. And then here it talks about IOC use cases. It's good for finding malware. And then you can investigate information, and so it gives you the breakdown for the components. Okay. So as an analyst, you're expected to do these things, right? As you gather the intelligence. So go through the page. It's going to give you like how it's formatted, looking at the information. So it will tell you. So there's some sample information. It's going to give you logic, the type of service. So as you go through the page and looking at the IOC logic, right, you would review the use cases. How can organizations subscribe to Open IOC platform and gather the intelligence on threats? If you read through the actual page and look through their screenshots, what you need to do is you need to use the attributes or the binary files that is used to identify your malware or your utility. You can search for registry keys by run keys, right? If you're looking at the register keys, you're gonna start looking through the run keys to identify your malware in your utility. Then you would look through the feeds to be able to identify the IP addresses because malware has to move across the internet. The hash values of the malware or the utility, it doesn't necessarily have to be a malicious code, right? It could be utility that just mean like it would have some kind of tasks and actions. And then we're going to compare the metadata of the files containing execution tools or backdoor. So this is how you would be able to gather the intelligence on threats like malware. Looking at the bin file or the file attributes. Look at registry keys. That's really important, right? Go to regedit, looking at your registry, and then go through the run keys. So malware, because it is a software, you can look at if anything that's installed on your computer, it's in the registry. And then by using the industry feeds or some of the malware feeds, you're able to identify where that's coming from, which is the IP addresses. And then the hash values of the malware or the utility. And we would be able to compare the metadata. Metadata contain file attributes. And that's going to give you the files that would be used for execution or backdoors. Some would install backdoors so that way it would allow maybe possible access or even elevate the access to the next level. It doesn't always contain backdoor. It might have execution tools, right? Things that it wants to run. So just keep in mind that most of your threats that you're going to be facing is going to be advanced, especially if you're working with enterprise type or automated type of systems and networks. So we should have a better understanding of what it is, what kind of behavior it has, and how we should be able to prevent or contain it. Any questions? So the purpose of this is to be able to show you Mandiant and how you should be able to use the platform so that way you can gather additional intelligence. I highly recommend going back, looking at the website, navigate through it, and be more comfortable with looking at some information that's going to be useful to you. Okay? Because when you apply for work, and if you said that you can do this, right, they would have an expectation that you should be able to gather some intelligence to be able to build out security solutions for the organization. Mm-hmm.
How is this different? Because I remember taking this class than the last year's. Is it a new information that came out because it, as time goes on, everything changes?
Yeah, so different systems have different issues at times. So if it's this month, you might have more issues with software compared to hardware. It depends on how things are created. So just think of it that way, right? Like, let's say that you have home builders that build 10 homes. It's possible that one home builder would have more defected homes 1 month or 1 year compared to the next year. So you have design and engineering that have flaws, and it's a good way to kind of document these things. So they have these platforms or threat intelligence feeds that document these things. And it is a good way to share resources with everybody in the world, because you don't want people to get hurt living in a defective home. The same thing is for us in the technical world. Yeah, so you might look at the website, it looks different right now compared to last year or the following year, right? Because things are going to change and update. But what I want you to understand is it is a platform for you to research and pull information from. Okay, yeah. Other questions? Okay, so let's come back to the notes here. So I gave you the link to a lot of the others, right? We don't necessarily have that incorporated in our assignments. I encourage you to take a look at these links or even research them online to be able to find out what kind of information they contain. It's really good. This is also useful when you're interviewing for work. If they ask you, do you know how to do threat intelligence, for this particular position, you can, give them some information about what you know, what you've learned. Okay, so when you're doing threat intelligence, you want to make sure that it is timely, right? It is relevant and current, but also you need to have accurate information and relevant information. We don't just pull any information that we find. We want to pull information that's useful to us. Okay. And so with that, you would have a ranking in confidence level. That means that we can confirm, right, that threat is real. There are some threats that's not real and it's not really impactful, right? So you do see some discredited threats or improbable threats. So those are in the lower range. But if the threats is real, it's going to confirm at a higher range, 90 to 100%, and so on. So that's what you see here. Okay, so how do you rate these systems, right? You would go to Threat Connect and they would have a range for rating the threats, whether they're real or they're not real. So let me move this down in case you're still working on 4. All right, let's look at number 5. We're gonna look at the threat intelligence life cycle, and we're gonna describe what takes place in each phase of the life cycle. So we'll start with the first phase. So in the first phase, what we'll do is we are going to gather the requirements from historical breaches, trends, and risk assessment results. So as you step into the position, the first phase of the cycle, you're going to go back and look at all the historical data, right? Let's say that they didn't have an analyst to be able to put the information together. You're going to go back and look at the logs and pull some of the, let's say that they had maybe one incident in the last 3 years. That's pretty low, right? Or multiple incidents in the last year. You're going to look at the breaches. Okay? And then you're going to derive the trend. Statistically, we can take a look at how that would be, like, why is that happening, right? What type of systems it was impacting. So with the trend analysis and in SIEM, in SIEM, it provides you with, the graphs and how, how that trend fit into the model. Then using risk assessment results, and we touched a little bit of this before, looking at the type of risk, what is a high priority risk, and the risk ranking. So historical data is going to help you pull together what's required. Then what you're going to do is looking here based on your historical data, you're going to move to the next step. That means that you're going to go out to the platforms that I had showed you earlier, and also the threat feed to be able to match up whatever the information you can pull from those feeds to collect your data for what is required in your company. So let's say that I have a breach, or let's say I have distributed denial of service 3 years straight, right? It take down some of my servers. I put together that data and looking at the trend and looking at why it's happening. But to get a better or clearer solution, I need to also go out and pull some information from the platform and the threat feed. That's going to give me a better understanding of, why am I the target and why it's distributed denial of service? Where are these attacks coming from? The IP address viruses and so on, right? With that, what we can do is we would pull that data and we would say, okay, maybe we need to beef up our firewall or implement a better appliance and the rules for those. So once you have collected the data to match up with whatever that was happening to you before and what you need, right? The requirements is what you need for the company. You are gonna process and analyze that data. So in a lot of the security management tool or, the centralized tool like SIEM, the CM, it's gonna give you the analytical tools, but there are software that we can use to be able to do that. And then once you have the data processed and analyzed and graph, and this is why, it's important to know statistics and it's important to be able to work with analysis software tools. We're going to put that into a report and disseminate it for the decision makers. Okay, so not just to your IT team, but to executive and then the business managers and so on, because your report is going to show the lack of what we need to do as an organization to improve, right? Maybe training, maybe upgrade our systems, maybe patching our system, and that requires time and money. And then what you're gonna do last is to be able to obtain feedback and looking at how lesson learned and how we can improve for the next round. Okay. And that is how you perform threat intelligence. Right? So this could be in the span of a long period or sometime when you're dealing with incidents that could be in a short period. So it varies. Any question? Okay. So with that, what we'll talk about is we'll talk about your information sharing analysis centers, your ISACS. And the areas that you want to focus in. So if you work in any of these areas, this is a helpful resource. Okay? Healthcare is one, and that's HISAC.org. If you work in financial industry like banking, investment, stock, right? Things like that, right? It's FSISAC.com. And then for aviation, it's this website. So they only focus in these three areas, these three industry, I should say. And it is a way for people professional to share information and the tools specifically for these three. So let's say that you work as a cybersecurity analyst in any of these three industries. This is a good resource for you to use. Okay. And then you ask me what's outside of that. There are other resources you can use, and I gave you a whole list in your notes, right? So in general, we have a lot of really good resources and platform for you to gather intelligence. However, right, there are specific focus in these areas. Why? There's support and also funding possibly, and also looking at the importance of that. I think without healthcare, we're crippled as a nation, right? Financial systems really move things around because you won't have products to store without financial systems, right? Think about it. If you can't buy produce like groceries, gas, things that you need, that also cripple a nation. And then you have aviation. In aviation, we can look at consumer type area like airports, transportation, things like that. But aviation also needs repair. So this course is really focused on the higher level of how we operate for cybersecurity versus just, doing, we are going to do scans and using tools and things like that. But I want you to have a perspective that ultimately all of this information and data is going to be conclusive on how we can do better in building our infrastructure and looking at ways that we can not have the same issue over again, right? Close out security gaps. Okay, so let's talk about threat actors. And in CIS 27, we touch on different type of threat actors. And threat actors, in various areas. So what type of threat actors have the most resources? So security is about a race. And that in that race, it consists of how much money and resources you have, right? And resources could mean time, right? Resource could mean system, resource could mean people. So the one actor that has the most resources is your nation state. You guys remember what nation state is? Is what? We always talk about that as a national security issue, nation state. Government funded bodies, right? So when you're looking at China, they might be funding a certain group of people, right? Or, organizations to be able to perform certain things. And this kind of lead into like the cyber warfare and other areas. But nation state is government funded entities. That's why they have the most resources. Okay. And then you have what type of threat actors are the most dangerous and difficult to detect? That's your insider threats, people within the organization, right? It is difficult to detect because they already know everything on the inside and they can go below radar. So this is why when you deal with like high clearance, highly sensitive environment, they do thorough background because they want to make sure that the individuals that they hire is trusted. But sometimes they can be defective, right? That means that they can be trusted, but over time they can be bought, right? Let's say, so I went to a seminar one time, and one of the CIA agents came up and he presented, and he showed pictures of individuals that were being bought by entities, right? Could be countries in the world for various things, like people who are professors. There was a Stanford professor that was doing some really secret research that is really important for everybody, like all the nations. And so they had taken a picture of him exchanging information and money, when you get into a lot of these areas, kind of interesting. So they were showing like 10 cases, and you'd be surprised when you're looking at these pictures because they look just like you and I, right? Normal people that goes to work 8 to 5, and they have professional jobs and they've been working in their industry for a long time. So sometimes it's really hard to detect because they could be a colleague that's there for a long time. So the professor that I was referring to, he was with Stanford for quite a while. I didn't ask them on what they did with that particular case, but they did say that it took them almost a year to investigate that particular case. So that was really interesting. So what you see that it's harder to detect. So that means that we have to do a better job of monitoring these people, of the activities that they do on the systems and in the operations, right? I'm not saying that you should spy on your employees, but there should be some kind of flag that would draw in certain cases, in certain behavior. So a lot of the time when we slack in a lot of the areas, it's harder to find these actors, especially from the inside of the company. Any question? Okay. So for the Microsoft strikes, and you can refer to also the notes, these are some of the categories that's used to be able to look at events and activities. So they break it down to these 6 categories. Spoofing of identity, and that is usually what you see with using fake IP or could be real IP addresses, but not their real IP addresses, right? Using someone else or another system address, so IP and MAC to be able to validate who they are, or user impersonation to be another person from the inside. So that's considered spoofing of user identity. And then the second category is tampering. That means that delete or modify files or server objects. So that could be files or folders or containers on the particular server. Why do they do that? Right? For various reasons. Delete files so that way it's not available, right? That's an area that we focus in cybersecurity. And then repudiation, change or delete logs. So that way it's not covered, right? They cannot be uncovered. So that means that they can go undetected for a long time. Information disclosure, distribute data to the dark web. And then denial of service, as I mentioned before, this could be distributed or non-distributed, could be one single target, right? From one system or from many systems for that particular target. It's just to cripple the system so that way they are not available. And then lastly, elevation of privilege. Change user rights to a higher privilege for unauthorized access. So when I get in, that should be the area that I want to focus in so that way I can have more access to data to be able to control, right? So let's say I need to be able to access databases so I can get account information, transfer, and so on. So transactions and records, I need to elevate my privilege. I'm just no longer a regular user. I have to be at a higher access level. So these are the threat classification categories. So when you're looking at the threats, they're gonna fall into sometime multiple, right? A lot of the time into these categories. So when you're looking at an attacker, right? They would maybe spoof to get into the system. Once they're in the system, they might delete or change files or and also delete their logs so that way they can cover their track. And then they would take your data and then sell it on the dark web. Data essentially is really a way to monetize, right? And you see this even with tech companies. So how you're able to get free tools and free resources. Sometimes they're gonna get your data on your search and things like that to be able to sell that to marketing companies to market products to you. But ultimately, personal identifiable information is a way for people to make money. And so for a malicious actor, they would sell that on the dark web. So when we go through, we have to classify the threats. Why do we do that? There are 2 benefits in threat classification. Number 1, you have to use a common framework to describe your threat. This allows us to uniformly, right, describing what that is. So it is a system, think of it that way, so that way it is clear and specific. And this is what the industry uses, the framework. And by doing this, we would then allow others to contribute and manage the information. So if we share that out through the platform, what will happen is other people might be facing the same thing, or they are finding that information useful to them. And just like you or the next company, right? So using that, what you will see is as a community, we're able to be applying information in a useful way. And the second benefit is if you know the existence of the threat, you are gonna be better in understanding the behavior and the options in controlling that threat. So therefore, this certification is, there is some hands-on aspect, right, in the certifications, the lab component of it. But you have to know that it is a higher level concept in security analysis. So it is a little bit harder, however, definitely demanded for the industry because most of us operate here. So we talked about the life cycle, right? The requirements gathering the faces that you see there for data collection, analysis, intelligent dissemination, and all of that. And then the ISACS, the 3 industry that is focused in that, and then the threat actors. So I didn't include like organized crime. You see a lot of this now, right? The people who call you, right? Those fake phishing phone call, you owe tax, the IRS is after you. They are part of the organized crime, right? You got the hacktivists and the insider threats. So these are the most 4 common threat actors. And then Microsoft Strides, as we mentioned before here, and the benefits of threat classification. So if you are not using this model, you can refer to PASTA or Process Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis, right? And other models that are there. I think right now, the way the industry is well documented. I think that you're in a good time. I remember when I first began, a lot of this was not even in existence. So I think we are doing a better job of like relaying information and sharing the resources to everyone. Okay, so now we're going to talk about modeling. We need to determine the capability of the threat. So that means that we look at the intention, we look at the ability, and then the attack surface. That means that how it's going to be performing the attack on certain devices on the network application, or even physically with an individual or the target. Then when you're looking at the attack vectors, that just see how they're going to be able to get to the target, right? That's going to be the vectors. The likelihood of success, and that's really important because we don't want them to be successful. So if we're looking at the likelihood of success, so now the reputation for a threat, you can go to Talos. I think I've shown some of my students this in CIS27 before, but you can go to the Reputation Center to take a look at domain reputation like the .com, .org, the services, email, that kind of thing, and data research. Let's move 9 down to the next one in case we're still working on that. Okay, so we will visit Talos Intelligence, so you can go to the website. And then you can enter the IP address. So go here. And then we'll type in the IP. You know who owns this domain? Google. And it's gonna make sure that you're not a bot, right? Or perhaps because I'm on VPN, so that's why it's doing. Yeah. So when you see all eights, that's Google. They've owned this for a long time. So it tells you, right? So you can start with an IP address and then you can look at the domain reputation, right? It does a DNS match. So if it's a real IP and it's registered to a domain, it should be able to give you that information. So look at the content on the page and you should be able to answer the question. So going back here, we're going to look at the host name, the domain, the network owner, and the sender IP reputation. So host name, domain, network owner, Google Inc. So if you have a public IP, right, that's legitimate. We can go and we can search for the reputation of that domain. So the sender IP reputation is on the right. It says good. Right? Web reputation is unknown. Yeah.
That page I'm not here. I did click on the link.
You can control click.
Where would I find it?
I think you're accessing. So control click. No, you're in the wrong one. Number 10. We're doing number 10, not 11 yet. Okay, so now we know how to use this, and then it also gives you the related IP addresses as well, right? That's registered to that owner. And then if you ever use the whois, it has the whois incorporated. The reason why it says this, you know that there are companies sometimes that they block this particular service, and then you can also find email volume history that's related to that domain. Okay. So next, we'll look at number 11. So once you visit the site, you should be able to see all the components to answer the question. Then we're going to look at 11. So we're going to look at the vulnerability information and the 0-day information. Okay, so the 0-day is on the right-hand side, right? You've got the reported disclosed vulnerability, and they track it also with the CVE number. Okay. So you are going to look at the 0-day reports, and then you just need to identify the software vendor that's reported recently. So I can click here on the right-hand side. And it's gonna give you the most recent. So you got Asus, NVIDIA, Asus, Apple, and so on. So you can see. And then you can go to the other pages as you need. And then Dell. Okay. So these are the software vendors. And if you want to know the specific, you can go and look at the information. So as you can see, we have a lot of vulnerabilities in the technology that we use, right? A lot of times, sometimes because we don't know about it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Okay. So again, for that question, right, we just look at the 0-day reports, which it already start listing on the right side as a summary for you there. And then you should be able to see those. Okay, so once we documented some software vendor that's recently reporting to 0-day vulnerability, we can talk about the type of model that would help you gather information about the relationship across the events. And so when you look at the notes, you're gonna have a couple options with the type of model that you can use. But the model that's gonna give you the relationship element of security events is gonna be your diamond model. So in the behavior assessment, you probably heard a lot about Mitre, right, attack. So this is gonna give you adversary tactic techniques, common knowledge, and Mitre does a really good job at documenting the type of threats, the software, the tools that's used, and how to mitigate it. So I would reference that, right, to be in, when you're working with Windows, Mac OS, Linux, cloud computing, any of the platform, or even mobile-based platform, they do a really good job. I think they can grow in the IoT area, but it's definitely a really good resource for you to look at behavior assessment. The diamond model, that's what we refer to, is going to give us the sequence, how the adversary is deployed and what's the capability of that adversary. So from the time that you detect the events and discover the information, it's going to look like this. Okay. So you would start with number one, when you're looking at the compromised system, then you're going to look at the capability of that attacker. They're going to, so we're going to then look into the logs, right? So let's say that your intrusion detection system sounds off. It says, oh, you know, there's, the alarm goes off and it tells you there's an attacker in the network, right? What we're going to do is we're going to have to go and look at their IP information and the log because it tracks how they got into your network. Okay, so you're gonna move across the infrastructures from, I would start with the outside in, right? Because just like your home, who opens that front door, we're gonna look at that camera system, we're gonna see who enters that door and gradually work your way in. Now, some people, right, depending also on the incident, you would look at the target. So let's say that it says that so-and-so, you know, with this IP address is you know, deleting files here, right? So you would start with that target, and then what you do is you would go back and look at your network monitoring system and see, take a look at that capture and see how that move across. Okay. So at this point, you're doing forensic investigation on the network. Okay. So you have to logically think about how I'm going to move from here to there and find the information, or from there to here. So we're going to move across the infrastructure. And then what we're going to do is we are going to look at how we're going to be able to do the net block of the identity. So if they spoof, it's harder to track because they have to spoof MAC in order to bypass the port on the switch, and they have to spoof IP to get through the router. Okay, because router uses IP and MAC is used by the switch. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the adversary and how that's targeting us, And then it's gonna help us understand, right, what is the gap right now, right? So sometimes when you're looking at an incident, you have 24 hours to get to close out that incident. And it can be very stressful because you're like, oh, where do I start, right? You would start with looking at the actual target they hit and then work your way backwards. So logs and events are gonna be your best friend. And then going through the system, and alarm system, intrusion detection and prevention system, and firewall is gonna give you the details. So dig through the logs for those. So a lot of time is gonna be spent here. Okay? All right, any question? So that's why we put down the answer for that question. Now, for 13, it says describe the activities that take place in the first stage of Lockheed Martin coaching model. Now, you are going to have to know the type of model that is being utilized, or framework that you would use in the certification. So Lockheed Martin, this is the coaching model is very common, right? It comes up in a lot of textbooks, a lot of journals. You probably hear it a lot. And how can a security professional detect and combat activities in the first stage of this model? So the model, it starts with the first step is recon. And in recon, it's about selecting a target, researching that target, and gather the information about that target. So let's say that if I'm the attacker, even on an ethical standpoint, right? When I perform recon, I'm gonna focus on my target. The more homework you do here as an attacker or an ethical hacker, the better you'll be off. Okay? But from an attacker standpoint, they're gonna pick a target, find out information about that target. How do they do that? They're gonna harvest email addresses, right? So if I'm looking for, like, I use this example in my ethical hacking class, right? Nike.com, right? I'm gonna harvest the email, and most likely you're gonna have a lot of employees by that organization posting in the social media area. So I would use email harvester. There are tools for that to be able to go out, crawl, and pull all of that information, bring it back, and tell me who belongs to this organization. Then once I have their email information, I would identify them, right, on social media networks, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. Then sometimes you would find information on press release, blogs, and so on, conference information that's published. So I would be able to collect that. And in some cases, right, you do passive here, right? This one can be, it is an active, it's an active gathering, intelligence gathering technique. This is passive. So that means that you just use social media and look, or just Google working to search for that particular individual. And then through that, then you're gonna start looking at their systems, right? Discovering internet-facing servers, their web servers. So how can we detect this? So we need to look at the visitor logs on our web server, because web server provides services for our websites. We would look into that for historical searching and alerts. We would also use browser analytics in web administration to gather this data. And mostly that's going to give us a better understanding of maybe some passive recon technique. And then if they're using active recon tools against our system, a lot of the times we should be able to have a monitoring tool to see right? Like if they're pinging you continuously, it should send off, right, with your firewall. It might not block it necessarily, but it should be able to give you some notification that you've been pinged, um, and so on. And then to how to combat it, right? So we want to build detection for browser behavior unique to reconnaissance. So if you're looking at that, they are looking at certain type of things, content, uh, when they're browsing about for information about your company, we would, maybe we can look at content specific or behavior specific. And then we would focus on how we would be able to build defense using technology and people based on the recon technique. So if they're calling or they're fishing for information by calling your employee, right, we want to make sure that we have awareness program to make sure that our employees are informed that, don't answer or provide information like that. We might be able to block that particular number. We also can block certain IP addresses. So there are many things that you can do depending on the scenario. But what you have to do is you have to take a look at how they got there in order to be able to have a combat technique. Any questions? And you don't have to write it verbatim, right? My point is to give you the procedure from the time that we look at from the perspective of the attacker to the time that we identify or detect them and then how to combat them. Any question? Okay, we'll try to get through in the next few. And so you can, again, find all of this information on your notes, right? This is the Lockheed kill chain. So we're talking about this phase right here. And then the second phase to this is weaponization. So this is when, if they gather enough information, they create tools. So tomorrow's class, we move from this phase to this phase. So in ethical hacking, you're gonna move the same way. The difference is at the end, right? The attacker, they're gonna gain what they want. They are there to gain. But what we do is we write a report on what could be potentially the gain for the attacker. So, and you can find the documentation for that here. And then if you're looking at the unified kill chain UKC model, it looks similar, right? But they have more steps. But as long as you understand, right, the movement from the beginning, which is the gathering information to the next. So one thing that I put this here because I just want you to know that the scoring system allows us to really track how your CVEs or your CVEs is impacting, but it does not directly cover all the threats, just like everything else, right? It only describes the vulnerabilities that you're facing, because remember that a threat is what? Something that takes advantage of your vulnerability. So if you reduce the gap by through the vulnerability, likely that it will directly impacting, right, the reduction of your risk with the threat. Okay. So here we'll come back here in a little bit. Let's go through and answer the next question, and I'll give you the explanation. Everybody's still doing this, or can we move on to the next question? 14. It's actually, why is proactive threat hunting essential to organization security? We always want to be proactive in security because it's going to, we want to be ahead of the game. We don't want to be left behind and lose all of the assets, right? Proactive threat hunting requires security professionals to continually advancing the organization's security posture. That means that you always, right, want to be 2 steps ahead. And the way that you do this is through threat modeling and analysis, because we never finish analysis, right? It is a continuing process. That's going to help us reduce the overall risk, like what I said before. As you can see, right, the questions earlier is, why is the vulnerability looks different this year than last year? Because there's always vulnerability in every technology that you use. You saw software, the common things that we touch every day, our Apple, our Windows systems, right? Even our IoT devices, power management systems, industrial systems. So this is why this particular profession is always thriving. It's because there's always continuing necessary tasks to perform to make sure that you reduce that risk. So if you do that, you would have less of the probability, right, in the case of data exposure and attacks. So that is your objective, is CIA. Okay? And so, and in your notes, it's going to give you a list of all the things, all the activities that you need for threat hunting. So I had sat in some of the interview for people who do guest lecture for this particular area topic. Many people use slides and they talk about threat hunting, but I don't really think they know what threat hunting is consisted of. And so when I put together your notes for your chapter 2, it kind of bring you from, you know, what is the threat, who could be your potential threat, and then what kind of model we use. So as you get to the end of chapter 2, you're gonna see that the activities that you would need for threat hunting, right? So 15 minutes. Okay, so here you can find all of those. Now, sometimes, right, you spend a lot of time in the beginning step, like here. And then you thought that you got pretty far, and then sometimes you have to come back to some of the other activity, right? So, you know, that's the nature of the game, is sometimes that you would find additional information about the threats that, you know, send you down a different rabbit hole, and then so it can grow to be but just make sure that you know your scope and stick with your scope. Okay, chapter 3 is about recon. It focuses on specifically on recon. We know that this is a way that we gather the information, and so I provided some information here. So first, in recon, if we talk about mapping and enumeration, ultimately you're looking for technical footprint. Whenever that you visit a network or scan a network or communicate with the system, there's always a digital footprint of how you are communicating with that system. So in enumeration is a way that we can create the map of the network. And you see this with Nmap. When you're scanning it actively, right, it's going to map how far you are from that particular host, how many routers in between for you to reach that host. And we saw that last week. Okay. So for 15, it asks you, what is needed before performing active reconnaissance of system and networks, right? We don't scan our neighbors. We don't scan our friends. We don't, the way that we practice is you can put up a virtual machine for simulated lab type of environment, or sometimes we use things like Talkbox or platform online. But if you are performing any kind of assessment, you need to make sure that you have written permission on an agreement that's authorized for that analysis on that specific system or the network. It needs to be very specific, because what will happen is, if something occurs in the process, you don't want them to turn around and blame you, okay? Because we are looking into private area of the system and accessing at a higher level. We want to make sure that everything is authorized. And when you sign this, make sure you have a witness. I would record a video because there's no repudiation, remember. And then in most cases, you are going to have to sign an NDA. That means that what is privy to you cannot be disclosed to anybody else. Now, we would have passive and active reconnaissance. When we're doing passive reconnaissance, we're just pulling information from websites, right? Like Google Dorking. When we're doing active reconnaissance, we would use scanners that communicate with the target. So in that case, every system call home, right? When you communicate. So I ask it for its OS, right? When I'm grabbing banners, it's going to report back to my system. In that case, it's going to know who I am, right? And in Nmap, there is a stealth mode, but just keep in mind that when you scan a target, likely that the network is going to see you, right? Like if they're running Wireshark, they're going to see you. If it's going to reach it, and it's going to have to respond to your IP address because you're requesting information from it. So when you're using port scanner like Nmap, that is an active scanner. You can also use exploitation toolkit like Metasploit. That's very common. It's equipped with Kali Linux. You can use HPIN tool. You can use DIG for DNS, and then host to obtain host information. Your passive reconnaissance, you can use Wireshark, you can sniff, you can use Whois, and you can use specialized search engine. Who knows the specialized search engine? Sure, we can use Google to search, but Google is going to give you a broader information. Can I use a specialized search engine? Shodan is one that's really good for like IoT devices and automated system, autonomous system, right? Those are mapped on Shodan. Now I think you have to log in, create an account to be able to do that. They track you on that. But Before, you can find the general information, and then if you're using services from Shodan, you would then create an account, but that's a specialized search engine. There are specialized search engines as well, outside of Shodan. Okay. All right, for 17, this is really easy, right? We're gonna open up our command prompt. You know how to do that? You're gonna search for CMD. Go to your search bar, type CMD, open that up like this. And then it tells you to do NS lookup and then the domain. Right? Now, don't assume that I can do this for every single domain. There are domains that they don't allow you to use NS lookup. You can try facebook.com to see if it lets you, or Instagram. Because a lot of the times social media websites, sometimes they won't block it. But it would give you the DNS information, right? So we would see the address. We also see related addresses. So that means that we know that they have additional servers. And then, the organization. So that's your non-authoritative answer. So you can try that for number 17. And now for the 18 part. So what I'm teaching you here is what? A passive way to find information. Is it passive? Can you do NS lookup? It has to resolve, your DNS have to resolve an IP to a name, right? Is it truly passive? And it is a request to that DNS. So NS lookup is used quite a bit to find information. So if you want to look up the organization domain information, that's a way you can do that. Number 18, we would then use the same command prompt, and you're gonna do a query. So, we are gonna look at specific records. MX is Microsoft Exchange. Microsoft Exchange is used for email, right? If you're using Outlook, you're using Microsoft Exchange. And you would put in the record for that particular domain. So let's try that. So we type NS lookup dash query equal MX Microsoft.com. And so with that, we would see their MX preference. And then the exchanger. If you have the protection incorporated there. So that's how you can find MX information. Okay, so with that, you should be able to answer.
Sorry, can you put that?
You need to try it on your computer. Open up command prompt and type in the bolded line.
Yes, after MX, what was next?
NS dash query equal MX space Microsoft.com. It should be on your assignment. And it should tell you the priority level. 0 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. 0 is used for routing and 10 is used for validating ownership of the domain. So if you see a 10, that's what it means. Okay, then what we can also do is we can look at some website and then we want to describe, right, what kind of information. So when you're gathering information passively, you wanted to find information about your target, their locations physically, their organizational hierarchy, right? If they have executive employees, etc., if there's related press, right? And sometimes you would get into a roadblock and then you have to find alternative source to be able to do that. But many times you might be able to get information from their own website. See if that still works. Right? And if you go to about company, you would see who they are. All the time they talk about, so they have press release like how successful or, you know, things that happen with their organization. And then as you scroll down, you find more information, right? So see if you can find all the things that are listed there from that website. Partners and clients, related press information, if they're executives or employees that are highlighted. So how can an organization prevent active reconnaissance activities, scans and pings and lookups, right? We would then limit the amount of services that would be for the external footprint. That means that we don't allow certain services or protocol. So possible looking at disable ports and then controlling the services through maybe security appliance or rules. And then you can also go through your intrusion detection system to prevent probes. So you can control this by saying, okay, so how many probes, how many scans, because when you running Nmap, it's gonna perform like, you know, hundreds or thousands of scans. So you can control the amount of queries or scans, you know, for your system as a target. And then we want to use the monitoring and the alerting system. So you're still gonna have the alarm system, intrusion detection system is good usually for the internal network. Intrusion prevention system is good, right, at the perimeter or also inside the network. So what we want to do is we want to use that to prevent the probes and we want to monitor. Or maybe set up a notification system on how it's gonna let us know if someone is probing us. Any questions? Okay, right on the dot, right? I'm gonna stop recording for the lecture. If you want to take a break, we can do that.